The 1AC was sent. Cool, Zach's good. Okay, are we all good then? Zach, Venus, you're good. Texas later. Snelling, you good? Okay, you're good. And then I didn't see the third judge, but if you're not good, please say something. Okay, looks like we're all good then. And stop me, anything happens, yeah. The advantage is Donbass. Escalation is imminent. Mikov into war between Ukraine and Donetsk and Elsk and over Donbass firing the other goal. And the kid Moscow preparing for escalation conflict. Ukraine is military person, the UAVs, and they give touch the drones in the game changing the war, Trump, and they approve the aid missiles and the launchers, the units, and they provide weapons to the region, the Kremlin, they sharpen the rhetoric from the air wars, and they give it, and they also help in the talks in the peace and some region determined between Washington and the conflict in Donbass as coordinated cause extinction of the Fisher, and the 50 US and now I appreciate how far you will also go to avoid defeating the Scotland funding into the conflict in Ukraine, and the George will convince that Russia would intervene. I'm not sure that Russia would never defeat the Donbass. Something in the chat. Yeah, I didn't see them, so I don't know. Okay, now they are. Yeah. I thought I saw them earlier when I snapped the chain, but I don't know. Yeah.
So we should probably restart that.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Okay, cool. Now we're good. Yeah. So I'm just gonna start from the top, obviously. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. The advantage is Donbass escalation imminent. Moscow into war between Ukraine and Donetsk and Moscow for Donbass firing the alley over of local Kiev in Moscow. A brave for the escalation conflict about Ukraine is wandering military approach to UAVs and Kiev tested. And the drones can change in the war. They Trump the aid missiles and launching the US. And they say to provide weapons to the region. The Kremlin did sharpen the rhetoric war. It's aiming to give the US not involved in the talks and chance of the peace of some region determined between Washington and the conflict in Donbass is escalating cause exchange to the Fisher. And fix the US not appreciate the war those who are willing to provide to avoid the defeating Moscow into conflict with Ukraine. And Ukraine is allowing the Russian Navy never intervene. I'm not sure the Russia could never. No, I would defeat in Donbass. The Russian Navy deployed the offensively to Russia. So toward Donbass leading to the larger conflict. The Russia considering to vital which of the borders of Ukraine. And the protection of Russia will weaken the Russia and the Ukraine is for conflict Russia. And the first chance and the Russia could cross the line meaning and the Russia lowers the bar nuclear weapons and the Amada and the hospital skirmish. And the conspire the nuclear war is higher. And the Russian threats to come to the planet into vital limited war because Russia and children catch over the world. And the states started the Pacific atmosphere involved in the world for Plexus and heat atmosphere in the world. And those who follow the academy NATO, and the Russian cooperation rules so peacefully yourselves economy, but collective collective defense commitments precluded acts like success and Donbass litmus to effect multilateral peacekeeping goal is Monaco. And 20. Question the importance of which organization taking the parties to Donbass and the fear of the conflict countries block and peace in Donbass and the plans of peace and emphasizing the impartiality countries should be to the taps and the interest and the two NATO problem and the problem nature of the peace and development and culture involved and the actions for the peace and the work the differences of the actions of peace and defective and the dividable with only possible NATO negotiations persuade the Russian involved in NATO and the Russian cooperation that is on the of the world is turn around the rival between Russia and the West and the Russian the crisis the courage the lack of the mechanisms and including Russia in the absence of framework and the results in countries who went to the true successful competition UN peace with and we can provide new framework NATO since the Donbass towards limits to missiles and the case in their plan solves the NATO and they can enable effective peacemaking humanitarian operations but Article 5 enhances both an internal external cooperation that's efficient and the intent Article 5 guarantees the two to exclude the whole alliance of the list for 11 the action dealt with delivered to the credit of Article 5 the NATO nations go to their everywhere region within their call for Article 5 the measure and the credit guarantees the presence of their force reducing and claims to MDC and W and the BMD and exempt to produce the footprint and the power of its acting we do not need the guarantees having the reason to seem no and the support and the important guarantees and the power to not believe the support and the guarantees Article 5 will be the point of the face of NATO and the recent activities to the plots and the actions including the peace officer Balkans order and the Parson and ask for an African Union to leave and engineer to fly for victims of country and the country and the earthquakes occurred the first to the body of conduction to the opposite of this and the chief guarantees that Russia's key for limit guarantees extras and the true one is to join the substance and the Russian competition elimination guarantees will now on you to the risk of its off the table and the parts of the peace officer namely not notified rules and determining the defense ambition, no future 19 the requirements of lines never stand to limits of the fashion the Russia, no not showing the lines and ranges guarantees to NATO institutional organization and lines and the guarantees the precision there. So no the player of the international community wants to translate international into social conflict. No doesn't match the efficiency cooperation the guarantees the great fiction between the all different all these following NATO expertise is keep it broader UN into peacekeeping efforts barrel and Hobby and 20 scholarships and capabilities in order for the peacekeeping training equipment and supporting the mission to include government to the channels of collaboration the regional organization ability to meet the force in the UN in the case of NATO UN and the projects for these missions access with the representation and the trigger negotiation to NSSR and then UN peacekeeping efforts and slate risk estimation is done and then not and on. Competition for resources to make it worse than imagine the competition over weapons to the code iron conflict or conflict control no in the conflict and rushing the diversity violence and fall into war environment degradation of climate and the public property and equality risk and the bodies and with the pro escalation intention and getting contraries and genocide and the reducing as maybe disease and competition defeats the real environments in China and then Taiwan powers and the US friends to the Texas situation instruments the instruction of church and the facts of the condition the source the attention to which the effort generated in reducing territories and living and therefore exploiting the public policies and the reducing the effect of the intrusions and market but charges make and the prevention of the peace. This the constellation of research indicates the overall effectiveness of peacekeeping, especially by the UN and the cherry pick failures by expressing the rigorously evaluate wider picture. And the scholarly evaluations of policy scenarios are essential to correct peacekeeping flaws Malta et al. In 20. Studies in the role of peacekeeping and reduce violence into data versus peacekeeping, especially in the UN. It's effective use of data sets model leveraging the different periods in the ocean peacekeeping the effort to different ways. The research in that university devising the funding and preferences of the funding scheme is large and positive seem to affect non-violence and destroy the words of actions and what is striking is consistent find that all peace peacekeeping effective regions and the rate oversee peacekeeping experience less conflict if you're destined to come for longer the peace and time the war if you for wars there is consistent and that's become the strongest one the IRT the academics and the interesting peacekeeping the funding which does not imply peacekeeping works all the time but distracting the bigger picture the words peacekeeping works and the given the chance to peace corporations protect by reducing violence. Yes, and peacekeeping forces associate the lower violence against sinister study. And the final verse tradition peacekeeping the violence rate and know that peacekeepers the figure resilience count infected steps and the personal to place themselves in the between the commands reducing hostilities increasing into the those greatest civilians the attacks the force and the post and the radiators and the target making violence less and the target carnivore so the all mission between 89 and 2010 and they're into the all forms of peacekeeping disgrace the risk of killings increase in number of the new insurance reduces the violence and there's one truth to the patterns with no which and evidence of clear peace governments like conflicts, new cross-border studies, access to peace respond extensions, peace governments will make negative goals to the unit to move out of the establishing the post areas against attacks and difficult would decrease willing to the forces attacks of the peace community reducing the conflicts between state wars not happen that news analysis of all states in the 4,605 no which if peace government sanction that's will would not increase in no peace more sense risk of conflict choosing stress 70% BDC zero and peace governments make the difficult to the insurgency movement and have the free chance to do supply rebellions make the difficult to fight no states find peace where they keep the limitation to some the comments likely and there's a third party will willing to verify the return to the third party steps in this between and to bring peace when the rights now they're leaving for no commodities likely to see the agreement between the peace teams are forcing incentive and they findings to reveal the role of interventions and the plan of resolving the tension and part of the implement the demonstrate the key and they encourage them commands and settle for this in place of the studies and the foundation to peacekeeping long-term seats so to the between 45 and 98 I'll find agreements all the last of one third party which says that the UNPOs are not affected because of the interesting and then the conflict over the idea the sources of boost and the capabilities of reducing hostility the UN supports peace even longer and peace is more likely peace lasts unfortunately and the conservative estimates peace reduce the war 85% of the AP groups they may contain conflict to reduce deaths next one was less likely would end the war occurrence of the question to time and peace works to how but how the world was named with POs and the better job the reason and the quality of the literature tends to name to the quality risk and the sexually dirt fears to identify and what we're going to call quantitative and those college students and the full range in the very cases the success and the peace no wisdom the keepers and deploy the different patterns understanding they will come to the policy evaluation is clear and the suitable policy action in the context of academic situation the risk of the role of the reputation sense and the consequences of affairs rather than the most people the one to want to it's not going to be counselor the dramatic factors no the color context peace gives there's high quality studies every advance and there's going to relation to the peacekeeping to reduce the bloodshed without peacekeeping we would see the violence and the eventually necessary peacekeeping would not make the world and they say peacekeeping to devil it's only a question of whether great power tensions inhibit successful missions Coleman and then Williamson and 21 in order to intentionally be viewed as resilience against the nature and subordinate behavior. In the case of with eradicate social factions, peace officers, and they displayed longevity last 75 years for peace officers. They go extensive now to the criticism of additional amounts of conversation, the argument against the peace officers management tools that no evidence takes the interest in advancing the difficult case of problems with the peace officers turning to the election strength and the desire to apparently ignoring the problems of the difficulty and conflicts of the UN operation to establish the rigorous analysis there's no data to the effects of the UN invested $200 billion in the conflict. They're willing to reduce under the 50,000 lives of which they to save no actor. No one to detain the faction of the peace officers in the society would which the land the protection of this body, and it makes it nutrient in the absence of operation in society. There's number two, there's no other affection, the person difference as soon as the operation facility, and which hires not appeared in the favorable Syria, Yemen, Libya, Green, in the Mamor, and the opposite main tool. There is no alternative peace even absent, and the liberal colonialism will be worse than ever this culture. And then 20. The only liberal and viable attacking the opponents in the 21st century required liberal and despite in which the interior also authoritarian and the West liberal species which the hostility committed to the imperfect and may only for any liberal from the dominant with liberals and the peace from the south and critiques liberal peace and dominant paradigm and the criticisms of the peace rather than also there's also the peace between the south and there was also the peace between which the purpose and the critique also to the clear understand the peace and the authoritarian and the transition to peace reinforcing the witness and the pronouncing and the renouncing the intended premature and the absent the elder rights and also the peers and the peace of what they've done and the great politics with the furthering the authoritarian peace thus the plan the United States federal government should limit the defense pact North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the member states peacekeeping is necessary in the strategy even outside traditional policy framework plug back and then 17 peace building can empower the approaches with beyond the gender policy with stopping the broad popular resistance from the violence and including the proposal of resistance to the violence some of the scene the world the resistance in the social areas in which therefore no weapons of the weak and includes just bounty no to ignore the work and the resistance that require the activity strategies and mobilize and political alliances and then the social networks and the challenge to the violence and the for groups and peace and there should be some positive some of which is to create elements which in the group's appearance become another exclusion. Mark the card, or actually that's the end of the card. So yeah, I'm good.
Good.
Yeah.
Cool. The 1AC describes peace building. So my first question is, what is peace?
So we would argue peace is the position in which bodies, like unnecessary bodies, are not dying as a result by skirmishes or wars or proxy wars administrated at a global level. So
peace is only in the context of when wars, proxy wars, etc., do not occur?
Yeah, so we would argue that peacekeeping operations are operations that seek to intervene when there's a possibility of a war striking. We've isolated that within. Cool. We've isolated that they went. Sorry, go ahead.
I have a follow-up question to the first part of your answer. You said unnecessary bodies are killed. Who and how do we determine what is a necessary and unnecessary body?
Well, that's our argument. We've argued that all forms of like violence that occur because of either miscommunications or like different societal variations between war. Peacekeeping operations allow for interventions to where those skirmishes do not rise to the level of war where people like actually die.
Well, I understand what peace building missions do. Your argument or your answer was first is that peace is when unnecessary bodies are not killed. So
I guess I misspoke. There's no unnecessary bodies. It's when bodies die as a result of
any bodies.
As a result of failures to make peace as a result.
Okay, cool. Next question. The Fisher evidence says that conflict causes extinction. My question then is, what theory of IR does Fisher use to come to this conclusion?
Well, I don't think the Fisher card is uses a theory of IR, but rather it's an investigation to the Bostock scenario, or the tourist two cards in the YC as to how that scenario specifically will escalate to a nuclear war.
But what does that? Okay, well then, what priors, understandings, kind of tenets does that card or any of your 1AC cards use to conclude that scenario escalates?
Yeah, so a large amount of quantitative evidence to analyze the specifics of the Bosnia or the Donbass scenario rather, as to why those conditions themselves will lead to war.
What are those conditions? That was the hard.
Yeah, so obviously Ukraine, well, vis-a-vis alliance commitments in Ukraine is what will miscalc likely into a war, as well as hinder peacekeeping operations both in Donbass as well as the region internationally broadly.
Sure. The evidence also says, quote, Ukraine is a red line. What does it mean for something to be a red line, and how do we know?
Yeah, it's a position where if Russia perceives the U.S. as crossing that barrier, it will either miscalc into a war or they will either miscalc into a war or explicitly start a war because they perceive that territory as part of their own.
Okay, cool.
Just to clarify that it's not the U.S. drawing in. The first evidence indicates that it's Ukrainian groups in Donbass.
So who strikes first then? Who escalates?
Well, it could be a number of actors.
A number of actors. Cool. Last question I have is peace building empowers resistance strategies. How?
What do you mean?
You read Ev, that's peace building empowers resistance strategies.
Yeah, so the card isolates how so when third-party actors try to aid rebels who are trying to tear down governments, peacekeeping operations allow for the opportunity to both those rebels as well as those governments to actually talk to one another. The card gives an example of Namibia as an example where those things were successful.
When in CEDA, it'll be one-off in case. And could I get some confirmation from everybody when you're ready?
My computer is frozen. I'll let you know as soon as it's. Okay, I'm good for an order. Right, I'm good because you gave an order.
All right, and Tyler, good. Okay. First off is the governing alliances critique. The one I see shuffling of alliances is white reconstruction. Gendered anti-blackness and racial colonialism have shifted in form away from direct violence and towards systems of manufacturing. Consider their imagination of institutional capacity to order the world as an imagination of white beings, ascendancies, and create death zones for black and brown people all over the planet and extinction. That's Rodriguez in 2020. The global U.S. racist state admits this family reproduces infrastructures of gendered anti-black racial colonial violence, flex, and reform inclusion in the master experience reproduces anti-black sociology and certain people's liberation and act for as they recognize that there may be no outside to white reconstruction political subjectivity to gender anti-black self-characterized modernity, white supremacy, and physiological and ecological violence animated by military mobilization, white being this worldwide, and two by difference between white beings operational alliances and the articulated across groups of race as foundational violence, juridical, cultural, economic, political, and militarized white supremacy, careers, politics as coalescence of hegemony attempts to address a contradiction while sustaining global logics of U.S. social political form as racial settler colonial order at stake. It's a reorganization of alliances, gender, racial stereotypes, and social identities, sustaining white being white institutional monopoly has been convened around apartheid racial power, complicating hegemony are the subject to the anti-white racial colonial violence, of course, same power as the preconditional war order, the notion of consistency. This is broad war is the overwhelming modality of rule over people whose humanity does not exist in black. People were the subjects non-hegemonic origin by institutionalized practice of physiological, spiritual, and discursive. It is a region that distinguish consent, sacred, sexual assault, mob lynching, mob violence, lynching, land displacement, genocide, enslavement, gender normativity. The constitutional basis of hegemony has always been overwhelmingly reserved for white. Being the history of the modern genocide and ecocide, the people are exterminated, their environment is destroyed, their land is preceded by a dying people, demanding ongoing confrontation with the modern condition of the perpetual anti-black violence. Any conception of hegemony tacitly presumes non-constitutional power of anti-blackness and racial colonial war as conditions of sociality. There is little room to consider the social order hegemonic unless hegemony is explicitly defined as a relation of consent that has been reserved for white social subjects. And mainstream IR is both wrong and racist. They white out colonial violence. As Harper, Shimon, and Gordon in 2020, race does not figure into mainstream IR, unable to explain the core realist disciplinary hegemony. The IR referred to race only through colonized language. Racial coding continues to demarcate white versus non-white races embedded in the language of poverty and instability of power per excavation of power cannot exclude colonialism and imperialism. States are foci at the practice facilitated the nation state colonialism, racism, and xenophobia. Governments mobilize ways to foster over nationality. The nation state is a consequence of imperialism. The discipline is usually overlooked the colonies and fascism factoring race abandoned conference or tricontinental congress established solidarity outside dominant IR. The notion of the global sphere is not one with an implicit hierarchy commensurate with realities of settler states when it is predicated on race. The reality of the dominator reveals a perspective of racial domination and inserting race into the framework, problematizing impoverished posturing of IR, viewing states only through capabilities as little to explain how the global north south came to have such grossly unequal capabilities in the first place. The liberal perspective remained limited in their ability to articulate interactions among states and other actors. The race inadequately explained race as a productive causal variable. The constructive turns also asymmetric ability to tackle neocolonialism, symptomatic of the discipline's commitment to erasing its origins, the continued commitment to racist scholarship. Either war is obsolete or the people are. The ecology of war ensures an endless source of mutation and innovation for weaponry. The 180s move to analyze war through a cause and effect chain intensifies the rhythm of the ecology of war. That's COVID-19. The milieu war, ecology of war is itself a source of mutation and innovation. War is generative insists on distributive or assimilation agency beyond divisible involves those materialities say little about the broader ecology. War did not become technological. War has always been an assemblage. The object cannot be dissociated from its ecosystem. The technical object is caused by an environment. Parts become more vibratory applications, not just linear increased extrapolation of physical phase properties allow fluidity and creativity and non-linear history. Human history did not follow a straight line in ecosystem. It's the milieu that reverberates to ecology represents entanglements of objects that make human creativity possible at every level. The milieu lingers, mutates the levels of intensity. Causality is not a sufficient category. The ability to analyze cause and effect requires a reliance on the instant. No such moment exists. It is this process that must be captured through this rhythm or consistency that acts as a lure. And the 1ACs move to influence Russian behavior through policy modification and cybernetic resilience building par excellence. Their understanding of international relations stems from a command and control paradigm developed at the end of the Second World War in order to predict and modulate Russian behavior. That's Sarah Weatherford and Matvienko in 19. Discussions of international relations in terms of intentions or desires of Russia must be understood as shorthand mystification of ruling class power. The emergence of cybernetics for the military industrial complex was an important part of the nation's ascendance. The new imperial leader computers networks played an important role in U.S. victory in their extension into electronic commodities, industrial automation, supply chain logistics, financial trading was crucially so on pacification of the world market does not have the finality rather to generate new wars. These conflicts radiating across the planet include the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan, and counterterrorist operations across Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Nigeria, the Philippines, Philippines, Mali, Libya, and many other theaters of so-called war on terror interpenetrates and regional conflicts such as Kashmir, Chechnya, and Yemen, and also overlaps with Israel's operations against Palestinians and determination to maintain nuclear weapons. Its mutating fronts have been a bleeding edge for the development and use of hyperweaponry, counterinsurgency operations, domestic surveillance, and digital strikes and treason to whiteness is loyalty to humanity. The alternative is to reject the 1AC by decentering and demythologizing whiteness in favor of centering blackness. That's key to any ethical research project. Even if they win analyzing great powers, that's important. The alternative is a prerequisite to the plan. That's Subratnam. And 20. Demythologizing decentral will require a wider ethic of learning to moral and epistemological consequence of whites, subject treats the whiteness loyalty to as humanity, not modified whiteness, but totally deconstructs or rethink the distinction between war and violence. Coding of evidence has been a result of racialized categorization, withholding war rather than violence offers scope for contemplating colonial, imperial, and racialized inheritance. This is the point of departure for considering sovereignty. Decentering whiteness means relocating ethical center of gravity to recenter blackness. The starting point, given that blackness has been overdetermined by experience, which located at the underside of humanity, the shaking up could connect them to politics of the diaspora, connectivity, suffering, and solidarity, working through blackness will get an important base which will not contemplate the racialization of humanity. Research on great powers will still be possible. Would have to embrace interconnectedness and abandonment of anarchy in favor of more positive application of sociality. This would make it impossible to study an institution that's embedded in their political foundation. More attention would need to be paid to coercion enabled by others. All such projects would be informed by hermeneutic suspicion. The last several decades have been a continued asymmetry. Epistemological challenges have been sidelined through training and citation, which reproduce a wide subject position. Case. One, new U.S. racial war. It's a repeat of Cold War securitization tropes that never becomes existential but always justify violence. Cultural factors explain conflict better than the app. Data is conclusively neg on their argument that their evidence cites internal sources. That's Ambrosio et al. In 19. Securitizing actor shift an issue out of a normal political debate into emergency by presenting it as existential. The U.S. debate the Soviet Union as existential because it challenged American identity, ideologies, and cultural characteristics, garner a deeper understanding of geopolitical cultural emergence of Russia as threats is reflective of culture. According to the current narrative, the world order is deteriorating. Officials are engaged in over securitization, which rise power systems were articulated, so they now constitute existential threats. Has led to articulation of new order being set by authoritarian powers. Has led to the revival of core war tropes and revisionism threats to democracy and influence American geopolitical culture is directly tied to the LWO. Potential officials believe that challenges the world from the internal process found within Russia, and as a result of policy choices, these narratives reveal a lack of self-reflection. Policymakers have absolved America of culpability, and Russia threat rhetoric is manufactured by the war industry to justify intervention and profits, which turns their peace-building offense. That's just the 19. Cold War is used to justify profits for arms to demonize credit to curtailment of civil liberties and interventions, including Syria and Venezuela. It was manufactured by a war industry that understood that fueling conflict could consolidate power and profits. Their impact starts with a probability of 0.38%. That's Rodriguez. In 19, I get a sense of how probable nuclear war might be by looking at historical evidence, view of actors, and predictions made by forecasters. If we aggregate those perspectives, the chance of nuclear war between the U.S. and Russia are around 0.38%. Their authors are invested in a wider network of selection bias that is structurally incentivized to overhype Russian aggression. Be suspect of their evidence. That's Crossan. In 15, No Mercy Tank have decided to slant in allocating blame and portrays the United States as the victim when it does what everyone else does as psychologically unstable. This judgment is placed upon Russia by so-called experts. Russia does not trust the United States. That is simply Russian posturing. This is the over-reliance on entire knowledge. The only confirmation of affirming preconceived ideas that undermines the new attitudinal environment. Selection bias is rife within the community that analyzes Russia's mindset will inevitably always be a threat to the U.S. interest. American political world likes to specialize in plausible deniability. Do you want the Murray card?
Sure.
The changing of alliances in part and parcel with the shifting of empire away from direct control over nation states and towards imperial management. That's Murray and 20. Empire as a network rather than nation state subjectivities are not traits to work over but are vessels of war of shifting alliances with the view that independence will be gifted by whites form the rhetoric of war liberal studies, whether it concerns Russia, Chinese, NATO, or ASEAN IR. Got to start through imperial management, which continues myth about Western exceptionalism, European history, institution attack this whitewash politics continuing to normalize violence, critiques of IR. Have I carried the discipline to a cross down. One is pluralist inclusion. The outcome is not amelioration but extension. The West is still the universal and non-West guarantees tolerance as long as it adheres to the discipline. Another path understands the relation between empires and colonies is asymmetrical, constituted through alliance as well as oppression. And I can send that out before cross 6. I just resent out the 1 and C. It has the Murray card at the end of the Q shell.
I'll start.
Sorry, you just cut out for a second. You said end of the critique?
Yeah, it's at the end of the K shell.
Okay, Ben, let me know when you have it. Okay, cool. Zach, you good?
Mhm.
All right. The alt, it's a recentering of IR around the question of blackness. I suppose, what would this recentering look like in the context of like US's alliance with NATO vis-a-vis the Ukraine conflict we've
Yeah, I
isolated?
think that the Sabratnam evidence is actually pretty clear on this. The Sabratnam evidence says that we can still theorize and look at interactions between great powers. However, the way that we study IR should not be one that focuses on whiteness. We've read multiple pieces of link evidence that describe how the way in which the 1AC
Okay. I suppose my next question would just be then like, does this alternative result in the AF in any way?
We don't think that the alternative results in the AF because we've critiqued the way in which the affirmatives international relations theory informs its prescription. We think that the alternative is a prior question to.
So the U.S. would still have security
commitments
commitments with
of the
NATO post-alt. Like this, U.S. would still have security commitments to NATO post-alt.
I want to clarify something. It is not like the Sabratnam evidence critiques the idea that we should prescribe a solution and imagine a global order of such post that prescription. So rather, but it's the important part is what Zach said second, is that it's a sequencing question. We've critiqued the foundations of which you viewed the world, understood the world, and then prescribed that solution.
I suppose, how should we understand the world like better, I guess, then like what is the world like drives the world in this context then?
Well, so we don't prescribe a single thing that drives the world, and we think that that's the problem with what the 1AC does.
Yeah,
we think that the decentering of whiteness is necessary. We think that one way to decenter whiteness is
if you may, the Harper card mainstream IR is like necessarily racist. I suppose. What about like or I suppose what does it mean to like what should IR do in the context of centering race within IR?
Well, we think that the way in which the 1AC has described conflicts, the way conflicts happen, the way that according to a theory of anarchy, which assumes that states are not governed internationally, but that they interact and simply go to war because of a difference in resources is incorrect, and that the way that the world
what is the correct explanation for these conflicts then?
Yeah, so we think that resources may be part of that, but we think that it's also a question of how we perceive. It's a question of how perceptions are shaped by whiteness within international relations.
Yeah. Okay. I suppose in the context of the Russia scenario, we've argued that Russia perceives the U.S.'s alliance as like inherently violent. We get rid of that. What is the misperceptions that we've done wrong then?
Yeah, so we think that the Dyer-Weatherford evidence indicates that your attempt to modify or modulate Russia's behavior is an example of how is an example of the U.S. attempting to impose its own self. We also think that we also think that the piece of Fisher evidence from the 1AC, which talks about how like officials in the U.S. underestimates Russia's desire to like not lose war and would escalate in order to maintain its position in Ukraine relative to NATO, is an example of how you do in fact a certain reading onto Russia's intentions that we've read evidence is structured by whiteness.
We've got 10 starting. Stopped at 9:05, sending out the speech. Okay, should be sent. I'm just going to close a couple docs because my computer sounds like it is about to explode. Okay. Yeah, order is going to be case and the critique. Can I get a verbal or visual from everybody before we start? Got Zach, got Bugroff, got Het, got Bunis, got Tyler. Cool. Extend the case that outweighs one effective peacekeeping as a hedge against numerous global threats, resource disputes, autocratic backsliding, refugee flows, terrorism, climate change, nationalism, all cross borders, and risk nuclear escalation due to great power drawing. But that process starts with smaller scale conflict and instability that PKOs can resolve and create the base for durable peace. That's Lind evidence. That's a conceded impact. You should give it 100% risk. Then it outweighs second structural violence, conflict, threes, ethnocentrism, horrific violence against marginalized people in the Middle East, Eastern Europe, Central Northern Africa, and Southeast Asia, which are far larger instances of the impact of the 1NC. PKOs can resolve disputes and breed sustainable living conditions. That's the Walter and Coleman evidence. Third, Donbass independently risk nuclear conflict because Russia won't back down. Only PKO cooperation ensures resolution. That's CEDA and Fisher evidence. 4, extinction outweighs biggest impact under adding ethical framework. 5th is framework. There's no alternative to peacekeeping and vote. Best voting neg means less effective operations that make conditions on the ground actively worse and at worst. They replace liberal peace building with illiberal alternatives like Duterte, Assad, or Assad gassing curves. That's a Coleman in the Kirchling evidence. They say Russia threat. It's about guessing a Russian intentions. Donbass about Ukraine, Russia, and ethnic conflicts, which only draws in the U.S. and NATO after they've already escalated. This isn't we need to stop Russia about U.S. or NATO action at all. Plus, the plan solves it because they're kids right of Article 5 and abandoning Ukraine without solving separatism. Zelensky to give up Donbass. That's global risk insights. In 20, Ukraine reintegrate the nice handle. But granted autonomy, this provide opportunity to use the Donbass to meddle in national for Ukraine is limited. Ukraine needs political backing. The context separatist question about U.S. war with Russia on Ukraine, where Ukraine is likely to give up the Donbass. This is dangerous. A trigger full tail military conflict between governments and separatists. Russia does not wish to annex Russian separatists. Seem to poise advance anywhere. Any to give the Donbass may prompt a hostile response to new offensive targeting strategic assets with violence and chaos. No impact. Cold War rhetoric is solved by the app by removing the ability to activate Article 5 as a fetish and impact. They say no. That answers the second piece of evidence. They say no conflict is not responsive. Doesn't you seem Ukraine-Russia conflict in Donbass, which is specific work our evidence is doing. It's only about U.S.-Russia war. Is the third level of our half scenario. They say bias is all what Walter evidence and the YC's hedging against prefer particularity that responds to this argument is over generic. You should prioritize it. That's Patterson. 98. The world interpreted after sustained analysis constructions makes all claims and appeal to evidence while admitting the claims are always contingent theories driven by rejection utilizing discourse research as best one is driven with contingent claims over does no particular phenomenon, particular claim, particular evidence open the alternative interpretation rejection. No big truth is not foreclosed. Faulty truth claims change are unavoidable. The individual who does not cannot act the critique framework decides to be by comparing the plan to the status quo or competitive alternative. You should prefer one is clash abstraction rewards dogmatism and erases particular research that cultivates epistemic humility and argumentative rigor that turns all to solvency because their opponents are better trained to be. Second is reductivism. You wink, you lose warps debate into a purity test that includes nuance epistemology and prioritizes intellectual frugality over actionable strategies. Comparing should questions as key to develop detailed mechanism and cost benefit comparison that enables movement broadly. Third, fairness debate is a game strategy over determines pedagogy because it's the only incentive for the ballot. Fourth is no offense. We're not saying plan focus is good, but plan exclusion bad. They get cane leads. So most must through their unique opportunity costs that outweigh the AF, and they all can solve them. Fifth, the AF is the offense under the framework. They reject peacekeeping, so the AF is a descent to the transition. Consequentialism is best. First, solvency they should be responsible for it. To honing their theory and improving its persuasive power to skeptics. Otherwise, it stays trapped in the ivory tower. Second, sweeping theories can't explain forward policy decisions that it can. Then our framework link turns all their offenses roads in. 21 theories are assumed rather than argued. Really good subject to scrutiny. No one knows whether optimists or pessimists have the better case. American foreign policy internal judges not feel easy within any single theoretical framework has not embraced any one approach. Consistently, the debate will never be settled. Choosing keep both taking out each as appropriate. Make theories make real predictions and offer testable practical advice. Seeing who's turned out better. Intellectual honesty is more important than ideology. What people think matters less when they can change their mind. Peacekeeping is good. That's Walter. They've conceded it. First, it reduces conflicts because less a conflict increases civilian death and causes substantially fewer mass killings. Sure, parties can't mobilize, making violence impossible. Second, it creates more peace. Third party PKOs can cause longer periods of post-conflict peace and ensure wars don't repeat. They can contain conflicts in small regions, stuffing them out before they transcend across borders. Third, before evidence and cites various studies, all with different research designs and large time frames. Failures are overemphasized and rare. It's also inevitable that first, a jurisdiction only states can stop or start PKOs, and they'll listen to critiques of individual missions. The burden of proof is convincing the UN to stop and providing a fill and actor. That's Coleman and Williams evidence. Second, there's no alternative. 75 years of empirics show that only variations exist, but any alternative cements authoritarianism through reinforcing existing power structures, particularly in the global south, which turns out their impacts. That's the Kirchling evidence. The extinction outweighs that's the only true fixed ontological state, and it determined denies the possibility of future existence. First standpoint, if they win any form of violence come first, you auto-act because extinction is the most terminal form of it. Any chance that people derive some value to living is a reason not to take the gamble. Second is agency alternative metrics to value self-determination and trivialize thousands of lawyers, litigants, policymakers that have dedicated their lives to legal masonry. Third is suffering nukes are independently painful and disparately impact vulnerable populations via starvation and disease. I'm going to preempt any fiat case. First, fiat's good at debating hypothetical consequences of foreign policy change. Concerned with nuclear exchange challenges the anti-black drinking. 84 global perspective must involve the world and all of its people. The prevention of nuclear holocaust, the most important issue of our age. Black should endorse anti-nuclear war activity. Resolution should be made available to the students. Reason for supporting reduction of implication of policies would be an important aspect of black education. Needs to continue expansion of black students face this issue. What would you do if role playing ought to be a routine? Even greater importance is U.S. policy. Mark the card of policy. Second, debating hypothetical impact and no plans isn't cruel optimism because we know fiat is illusory, but the civic skills we gain from discussion PC being spilled out to better forms of engagement outside of debate, which means that even if debates role playing is valuable in the context of the AF permutation, do both either overcomes the links or can't overcome the status quo. Permutation to the plan, and then the alternative in permutation to the plan with the mindset of the case, not severance, because the one is he didn't commit us to a particular epistemology of critiques must have an alternative text. He disabled African and clash. I'll do the link debate here. First, Rodriguez is wrong. The manufacturer consent argument is backwards because host countries don't consent to PKOs. They request them, and the UN has to consent. Second, Rodriguez says white supremacy code. Here's a global order. It's wrong. And punches the status quo. This figures in 20 domination never been a Western monopoly. The colonial theory is complicated by positionality. Readers judge argument less by evidence than position. The language of epistemic violence suggests the scholars are revolutionaries and comment to pick enemies carefully, avoiding a blunderbuss Western science while ignoring how authenticity of legitimate oppressive regimes that resent undermining values upon which scholars rely on based on epistemological differences tends to be self-defeating in attacking essentialism, contributing to essentialize the West. Colonialism attributes to the West is inaccurate and dangerous claims to champion the subaltern undermining assertions of victimhood by no means traceable to colonialism. The currency of such arguments mirrors ethnocentricism, exhortation to think otherwise suggests negative agenda, reducing scholarship to opinionality, can read the fragmentation, relevance, and demote rationalities, reductionist negation is unlikely to address the climate poverty, inequality, and crisis. Do the opposite. Decolonials tend to be conservative and practice to this quote the right reconstruction theory thesis totalizes imperialism. The Shamian 18 the anti-war movement have little to do with any of the war. Half a million Syrians killed, 94% by the Syrian Russian Iranian alliance. There's no outrage for this. Expendable the military capabilities of genocide, faster are not hands off Syria. Really means hands off Assad. Islam exhibits deeply authoritarian tendencies. And that places statues states themselves at the center of political analysis. Support is extended to the Assad regime in the name of anti-imperialism. Assad is the axis of resistance against U.S. empire. This regime holds the distinction of slaughtering more Palestinians than Israel. State is constantly overlooked and combines identity politics with the U.S. Anything that happens to view through the what it means for Westerners. Only white men have the power to make the history by arguing main enemies at home. This excuse from undertaking any serious power analysis to determine who the main actors driving the war are. For Syrians, the main enemies Assad, Western world organization holds offices about Syrian speakers. This course, the fascists, the anti-imperialist leftists, indistinguishable as white supremacists. Spencer Enoch and Coulter all opposing the place with all red and all left conversions considers to absolve the regime of its crime. They say I are racist. The one he sees an impact turn to this peace grouping creates the best conditions for resistance strategies. That's lack of evidence. You can cross-apply the vigorous evidence that I read above here. It applies here. They say Grove, the world's not defined by the Eurocene that's not in 20. Oh, actually, they're too pessimistic about modernity's potential. That's Taliesin. 20. However much harm we've done, we haven't done, and will only do harm. The Grove's pessimistic and little hope is critique creates only damaging inertia and action and resentment that sees to those who many of us, including Grove, would disagree with whether acceptance of traditional IR or authoritarian is populist. That Grove just proposed microkindness, however vague, resistance act or welcoming apocalypse as well. Right, a program of kindness and resistance can not change our world. Apocalypse generally most that is good and really appealing. Apocalypse change facts of recklessly callous and difference is possible to recognize a colonial past and present without a discount the possibility of improvement from the West. It is possible to use achievements inspiration growth. Denunciation takes insufficient amount of bodies and multiple meaning full success. Scholars who criticize the neoliberals and fault themselves in de facto agree with the notion that there should be no alternative. Mark the alternative. The Russian cybernetics have no weakness in the context of interpreting Russian behavior in the real sense. It's not the Afadano. It's specifically that cooperation is based on guessing. We're rather about ceding the Russian demands, which turns the Af. This conflating peacekeeping with colonialism is wrong. This turns the Murray Carty and the Russian cybernetics stuff. That's Harrison. 10 commentators characterize into peace building, although Iraqi peace building share characteristics of the difference should not be ignored. Iraq began with the invasion of war counters followed by peace building. Those most peace building missions in the Cold War have been deployed. The rest of the local party condition of birth are important, destroying regime through invasions, hardly equivalent degree of kind of deploying a mission at the request of local parties with the goal of helping those parties implement a peace. The vast majority of not involved forceful entry, but in this decision of false files and knowledge between peace building, war, and terror. Mistake number 2: quitting peace building with imperialism, colonialism. Although there's similarities, that should not be taken too far. First, colonialism practice to benefit imperial states, including extraction material inside of proclaimed civilizing mission. The enduring unquestioned assumption of the French policy was a colonist must benefit France. The same was true as Britain. Well, UN missions still reflect the interests of most, but they have not principally been motivated by efforts to extract. Well, on the contrary, full risk has been in the opposite direction. Those who claim peace buildings are the interests of capitalism. Mark Paris at capitalism. The long Paris card, not the short one.
Ready?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, on framework, you said your interpretation is necessary for epistemic humility. What is epistemic humility?
Yeah. 1 second. Sorry, let me just. Wait. Yeah. Oh, sorry. That's the clash standard. It talks about how, I guess, like abstracting sorts of forms of IR creates the ability to erase the research that we've done, which
That
is
doesn't
bad for.
answer my question about what is epistemic
Yeah,
humility.
I'm. That's the second part. Uh, Erasing that research is bad for epistemic humility, which is the idea that like once you've done enough research, then you kind of know that there are problems with your scholarship, or that if there are problems with your scholarship, you know how to respond to those things, and you know the limits of
I
your
guess
scholarship
I
in order
guess
to
I guess
say
how
where
do
it
we
can and
weigh
cannot apply.
epistemology against the consequences of the plan?
Wait, sorry, repeat. I missed the first
How
part.
do we weigh epistemology against the consequences of the plan? If you think epistemic humility is good, how do we weigh our epistemological critiques?
I think they're somewhat separate things. There's a question of, I guess,
Okay.
whether the epistemology of the scholarship that we forwarded is a good idea, but that also is tied into the material impacts of what that scholarship
Okay.
does, right? We've argued that fiat is a good thing, or at least a good, useful heuristic for discussing how it impacts, actually materially impacts people outside of
You made
debate,
the
and how we
argument
can.
that I have a different question. You made the argument that peacekeeping is good because it leads to longer periods of peace. When was the last period of peace?
The last period, it's not a question of global peace, but rather local peace. The Walter evidence is really good about this. It talks about how there's a bunch of what?
Where?
Where what?
Where
Where's
and
the
when?
Walter evidence?
Where and when is the peace?
Oh yeah, sure. There's been a lot of different conflicts that UN peacekeeping has solved. The Walter evidence talks about
No,
specifically.
I'm asking specifically where and when do you think that there is peace?
I'm trying to give you examples of where UN peacekeeping has created peace by getting rid of local conflicts. Does that answer your question, or are you looking for a different answer?
You haven't actually provided any of those.
Yeah, sure. The Walter evidence.
I have a different question. You talked
Okay.
about how extinction outweighs because of future generations. Do you think the affirmative is able? Actually, that's fine. You said that fiat is good to be able
We
to
didn't say
challenge.
future generations, but just denies future existence. But yeah,
It's the same argument. The fiat good to challenge anti-blackness. Why is fiat necessary to challenge anti-blackness? Or how can we apply the imagination that fiat produces to change the world
yeah,
in a less anti-black way if it's not realistic?
Yeah, sure. The Drake evidence talks about how, in order to form these global perspectives, learning about things like stopping nuclear conflict is good and creates the ability to stop anti-blackness.
Learning about different perspectives gives us the ability to create better futures.
I mean, I suppose that's a little reduction to the argument, but I suppose that's one way of characterizing it.
I'll send it out. It should be sent. To have all judges. Yes, yes. Okay, cool. The order will be the critique, just for flowing purposes. You could skip both the permutation and anything that says the word alternative, but I'll go straight down. There's not an overview. Can I get thumbs when everyone's cool? One. Submit is that new track and space rhetorical field shielded by a mighty ideology as part of a larger world. Refuse or roots create a binary between the world out there and here. The risk of finding truth space counter interpretation. The one to see is not studying the role of the negative should be to disprove the scholarship produced by the object specifically intrinsic to the plan. If it just solves the Rodriguez evidence is a white reconstructed set to the entire model debate. Impact turns every standard. Michigan is conflated politics, policy conflict is no longer sanctioned by top-down military planners, but a decentralized network of citizens who creates fabric through daily practice to drive to manage the war game via the Tika River Alliance system work while being itself aimed to mobilize branches, those of governance, model crimes, invaders, suicide, vices to empires, individual instances to be redeemed, rather systematic of the foundation itself, which is same by logic by progressives of mainstream media, reinterpret and de-radicalize BLM, proven by cross-checks when they say it's not about global peace, but local peace. That is our argument. Moments of fictitious and airplane retools militarism to reconstruct its foundation by narrowing a critique of the world to one of contingency within the paradigm instead of theorization at the level of the paradigm itself. This is predictable. Links to the plan and justifications, but are seeking for representations because a reason to vote AF, which I've chosen clash. I'll answer here. 1. AF choice solves for quoting your evidence, impact turn your defenses. 2. Plan focus debates, choice nuance, turning towards your offense, filtering the debate through 10 statements, unquestioned assumptions, what makes it a good idea. 3. Your interpretation is worse, cuts a Russian margin for negatives to be at utopian alternative structure critique with distinction errors. If the one error says that it is solely a question of competition or it is the game, as the two ACs put a vote negative to encourage decolonial anti-racist research, you should not prioritize the game over ethics. The implication of their argument means that voting affirmative incentivizes debate and scholarship that sustains the vines that you're seeing here and now. Winning a link argument justifies a procedural violation in the face of scholarship rooted in the colonial matrix. The idea that you link you lose is bad because you need to analyze the costs and benefits is wrong. We should not analyze the costs and benefits of racist scholarship in the status quo, but rather it's a de facto rejection of those. Debate is a game answered above. Plan inclusion, yes, we have a dissent to it. Or Rodriguez said evidence impact turns it because it says that plan inclusion is what waters down resistance and status quo. Rather, you should view the entire as a totality. He said wrong. There's no one-to-one correlation between voting affirmative and the plan enactment or the transition or peace building, but there is one between our orientation within debate, which is a series of repetitionalized tropes that occur over and over again. The next argument about app solvency, I'll do it here. The case does not converse. 1. Distancing dissent case outweighs this is a process of defer whereby colonial subjects deflecting sharing their own investments by pointing out political scenes where race obviously doesn't apply. This generates the capacity to wait as a secondary concern in international conflict. Remember that Michigan has no agency to change the structures, but they sustain violent practices in the Eurocene here and now. This comes first in proximity because your ballot can only reject the epistemic consequences of the plan. 2. You should presume colonial scholarship on base false. If we win the underpinnings of the 1AC or colonial, you should vote negative to throw out the 1AC and pursue racist scholarship be untrue, forcing black and brown debaters to leave ethical concerns at the door, engage anti-black scholarship on its own merits, do the costs and benefits, as the 2AC puts it, creates double conscious and submits inaccessible colonial grammars in the status quo. The next argument about sweeping theories, I'll do the IR debate here. 1 is that you are the sweeping theory. You've said peace peace building is good in all instances. It secures the world order. We have said that's bad. Impact turned it. And B is that yes, you have relied on a sweeping theory of the world. Your 1AC1 evidence says that there are red lines. It's based on a realist and constructive understanding of the world that is one that is inherently anarchic and we must stabilize to do so. That is our link to our Henderson evidence, which they have dropped. The application of mainstream IR as a paradigm for assessing state interactions is racist and historical. They perpetuate the mythology of the neutral European nation state that is structured by limitations and capability in a world system inherently anarchic and stable with no governing order, which is their argument about why peacekeeping is necessary and 1AC process. That results in the drive to stabilize the world and ensure non-Western world in order to project white reconstructions of bodies become chess pieces on the game board, strategically shuffled to maintain stability in the face of perceived anarchic pragmatism that constitutes black and brown subjects in politics. The 1AC is structured by white being the shifting alliances part and reflect and reform of international politics that be shaped over anti-black racism and status quo. The viewpoint is only possible when viewed through the lens of the colonizer. The impact is imperialist framing. The paradigm only functions for post-industrialization states that function through Western notions of economic self-interest. This is why the war on terror has become an endless bloodbath of failed nation states, drones, narco-terrorism against civilians, and why scholars describe actions like Iran, North Korea's irrational in relations with them failed. The impact is cascading violence against the colonial periphery. The last 70 years of endless war, which disproves their theory that we are at peace now. Soko, Nam, Laos, Cambodia, Iraq, COINTELPRO, the Bay of Pigs, Afghanistan, Libya, Iraq 2.0 proves that Eurocentric IR is a system of thinking paved in the blood of black and brown folks, and their idea that peace is good is an impact turn, because we have said that what do you consider to be peace in the first place? That turns the case even to the content of the app resolves an isolated instance. It turns failure to be Article 5, the former military futures and sustained project of techno warfare in other domains, both geographic and spatial. It shifts tactics and containment to function through other bilateral alliances and non-defensive commitments such as probing vessels, and to move that their 1AC evidence explicitly cites and says crosses the red line, which culminates in harder to check division of encirclement, scares adversaries more, makes peace condition inevitable, that attempts to prescribe IR in advance ensures the class of deterrence, command, and control paradigm means the U.S. takes preemptive measures that are interpreted as offensive capabilities by Russia and the status quo. The next argument about that they causes more peace and that peacekeeping is good, I will answer all the arguments that they have made on the case and on the K here. Every argument assumes a neutral approach to peacekeeping. Their 1AC Walter evidence says that, quote, military intervention may be able to reduce mass killings if the mission is impartial, unquote. The assumption of neutrality and impartiality is what we've impact terms saying that China paired with corruption, a lack of democracy and human rights abuses enables its economic model to outdo the West and rest. Quote, illiberal powers like Iran keep destabilizing the region, and quote, illiberal populist force are rising in the heart of the West. The 1AC curling evidence is not neutral, but based on a pure cartography of counterinsurgency that ensures the peacekeeping is framed democracy committed to the current geo and global social environment. Vadimo and Zabala 11. Philosophy is divided between those who argue with the truth realism and anti-realism, and those who try to avoid the quarrel with the world. Both the theorists belong to the politics of description. Those who overcome the dualism become the politics of interpretation. The tradition of the Western culture is a close example of the attempt to find the sense of one existence by turning to objectivity. Truth is violence because it's not easily become the imposition of others. Existence truth implies a post-description. Truth sentences assume these descriptions of truth once they maintain social order and also find themselves in moral ideas depend on the truth's unity. Truth does not therefore cause cease being to be violent. Through the use of dialogue and moralization. Politics of truth are the claims of political power. If this is nothing in society, truth and violence become interchangeable. The statement is made of appropriations based on the discovering, while the approach allows truth at the level of the hermeneutic. It's exposed to superficiality. We lose sight of what the world within all things are given and own engagement. Truth shapes the structure of the origin of the Western logic. Truth is meant to emphasize violence because truth is nothing but the justification of violence. Truth justifies descriptions with our scientific global organization. Any interpretation not frame the real realm of truth is wrong. The philosophical disruption of the establishment order. Philosophical hermeneutics is also a truth of relativism. Only such neo-theoretical way of thinking hermeneutics can adjust these cards to resist the claims of absolute truth and guarantee peaceful coexistence. Dialogue between the best ways to moralize politics. The West believes that it holds truth, the appropriate knowledge, cultivated guiding the interests of all other states. This answers the next argument that we have more studies. Our argument is that studies are framed through a Western understanding of international relations that posits the Western grammar as one that should be prioritized. The next argument of the state is that, number one, you should refuse to give into this so for this form of blackmail. Our evidence indicates that IR is a social framework that can be changed via agents from below, which means the alternative is a prerequisite, as well as a sequencing question to this argument in the first place. Second is that authoritarianism is the status quo, which means they don't have uniqueness for this impact. Our argument is that then it becomes try or die for the negative. The third is that the local is not the global. Yes, our argument is that yes, the state may be inevitable in the broader sense, but we can work to dismantle it and displace what is humanist in the status quo as it's centered. The next argument execution ways safe space on your flow. It will be the one in our the fiat case stuff. I don't know why you've read any of this evidence. We have not gone for a K of fiat. We've indicted your uses of interpretations of IR in the status quo, as well as your uses of peacekeeping and your understanding of peace. The Drake evidence not exclusive to your interpretation, nor your model of debate, nor the alternative. Yes, we think we should challenge institutions and consider those risks, but bottom-up strategies are better. Drake actually says that you should challenge those institutions through reading, and our links prove that it's better, and that you recreate hegemony in the status quo. The not cruel optimism stuff, cool story, wasn't us. Orientation to build safe space on your flow. That will be the one in our the alt text stuff. Also, the one in our the consent is backwards argument. I will do the next link here. You should extend behavior modification because they actually have it backwards. Their attempt to alter Russian behavior when the 1AC says, quote, is hostile to Russia is the definite red line, but the U.S. administration decided it's not is our argument because it changes fear and concern in order to increase their military capabilities for defense of tool and expansion of cybernetic regimes. It seeks to map out those red lines and then impose our understanding of what they are and what Russia thinks. The model is one of behavior modification rooted in cybernetic resilience building that begins with armed pacification of the world market that desire with support the impact of cybernetic regimes to control behavior modification as part of personal mutating for American cyber weaponry, counterinsurgency operation, domestic surveillance, digital strikes, sabotage, and culminates in violent instability, manufacturing products in the Middle East, Africa, and South America, which is how they disguise their peace building projects. Their understanding of IR stems from a command and control paradigm developed at the end of the Second World War to predict and modulate global behavior. That also turns the case. It causes misinterpretation and misattribution proven by their evidence that says, quote, you cannot worried about the US and does not understand Russia's sense of ownership over Ukraine. The reason miscalculation occurs is because Western military planners and war planners meeting central questions like, what would I do if I were Russia, or what would I do if I were Ukraine, which proves how the Project Air studies ensures conflict escalation and cyber rattling, direct response and non-response becomes flip sides of the same coin, framed through the understanding of Western security dilemmas and self-other dichotomy justification, coercive applications of powers impacted by Rodriguez evidence in the construction of white reconstruction that was above. The next argument about totalizes imperialism wrong. One, yes, we've said there are textures that, but the world, the idea to script and understand the world in order to influence Russian behavior and say that world building is always one that is good to domesticize local violence is bad. Two is yet, yes, we have said that we ought to change that structure. And if they win a link to this argument, we will impact turn it. Yes, totalizing structure is good. It prevents co-option to target at the level of structure rather than contingencies within it. They say peace building creates best conditions. I was answered above. It's the frame of peace building and status quo. The next argument of a too pessimistic. We've not read a Grove alternative. We've not said pessimistic. Rather, it's a orientation of prerequisite claim how we introduce international relations in the status quo. It does not co-opt or cede Russian demands because it's a question of your descriptions.
Cool. You good?
Yeah.
Let's start kind of on the framework part of the K. You do a whole extension of a piece of Henderson evidence that you said we conceded. Did I just miss this in the 1 and C? I did not see this evidence in the 1 and C. I don't think it's in there.
Well, one, Rodriguez substantiates that warrant as well. So
okay, cool. I just want to make sure that there wasn't.
I think if it's not Henderson, then it's the third card in the 1C. Forget the name, but regardless,
Grove.
The argument is that yes, Grove. The argument is that instead of understanding liberal order as one that is inherently anarchic, one that has no stable governing order, as per both your 1AC evidence 1 and 2, that says that there is some form of redlining that we ought to script out and then understand how Russia or the United States crosses that red line. We should understand that one is influenced by colonialism, anti-Blackness writ large, and not one that is influenced by no primitive society, because the idea that there is an anarchy within that state drives states to control that anarchy.
I actually have some follow-up questions to that. You said that we can kind of try and dismantle the state, even if it is inevitable. How does the alternative begin to dismantle the state?
Well, our alternative evidence says that self-identification is what drives the state and status impulses in IR. IR is not a stagnant system, which is actually proven by the host of 2AC evidence that you've read and says that it can be reformed. Our argument is that A, you are not in the direction of good reform. You've recreated anti-Black practices in the status quo. And B, is that if that is possible, per your evidence and ours, we should strive to reject both anti-Black and colonialist assumptions that reify IR in the status quo.
Sure. Let's talk about this piece of Fatimo evidence you've read. I guess it's talking about striving towards finding the truth. What is the truth?
Well, our argument is that you have scripted what truth is onto Russian countries and actors who require peace. So one of the answers in the 2AC was, quote, we cede Russian demands. Argument is that Russian demands, as viewed by the United States, are not neutral because every single one of your 1AC and 2AC evidence says this is what Western scholars believe Russian demands are. It is a Western reading of internal doctrines of Russia. Argument is that those are not one that are neutral, but rather framed through the objectification to understand Russia, to impose Western dialects onto Russia. That imposition is something that we've impact turned and said turns a case.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about the framework debate a little more. You say that, I guess, you've kind of said in multiple places that you're an impact turn to the AF. How come the AF then isn't an impact turn to your strategy?
Because we're at the framework level, we're an impact turn to the epistemological formation of the AF and its presentation.
So that comes first.
In academic spaces, and we do think that comes first. Yes.
Okay. I guess so. Epistemology precludes this idea, this notion of fiat, or what we should have as useful for heuristic for actually mitigating material
fiat,
effects.
As per the Drake evidence, is not imagining the institution of the United States doing something in the conditions of the world post that. And we just disagree. And if so,
the one in our doc is sent out. It'll be the K and case. On the K, I'll be doing the extinction outweighs debate, then the permutation, then the alternative stuff, and then picking up on the line by line where I had left off. Can I get confirmation when everyone's ready? All right. The extinction outweighs debate. Reject your ethical predisposition to utilitarianism. Debate has trained all of us to conflate consequentialist ethics as util as the only moral frame. Utilitarian logic is anti-black, slavery, Jim Crow, colonization, the prison industrial complex are all justified by white being as maximizing the rate of growth. Decentering whiteness means an unlearning of white paradigms of impact frame. The all solves through disconnecting war from violence. It's not serial killer logic to prioritize ongoing suffering over future threats. The inverse is true. They justify continued bloodshed to secure a white future. It's also a terrible modifier. 1% risk of WMDs in Iraq resulted in 3 billion deaths. Domino theory led to 10 million deaths in Vietnam and Korea to secure the LA. Racial capitalism kills 10 million a year to hunger. Only a radical restructuring of politics that prioritizes ethics can solve. We don't need to win. Util is always bad. Just like in this instance, you should prioritize ethics. Their consequentialist framing doesn't get them out of this. Consequentialism prevents the question of whether or not an action is ethical, regardless of consequences. Historically, the logic justified deployment of violence against non-white populations as laboratories to determine what the consequences will be, and their consequentialism fails. White reconstruction links proves that not all bodies are positioned equally relative to harm, nor is harm against certain bodies valued as such. And future generations is a new link. Cross proves it is their argument is future generations. It is a prayer and unethical to continue ongoing generating anti-blackness and racial colonialism to secure white future generations. Harry in 17 people go from limitless pervert to infinity to black people and afraid of no nuclear holocaust. Everything in life seems uncertain because of white dude. Come white people exist and imagine this every day. That's how black people get every time see blue lights flashing. Americans see every day before nuclear war. The executive committee white people would be in the oval none are surviving sickening nuclear holocaust. White people will step in. Black people learn the specter of having our existing race since we stepped onto the shore. We have lived through 2 holocausts with one more. The permutation do both. One is sever and links prove mutual exclusivity. We have links to their method and plan text that crushes a negative link ground. It's a voting issue for education and ethics. They get the spike links, which removes any accountability mechanism for unethical arguments. 2 is that order matters. Perm is not a combination, but an alternative sequence of events. All links are dissets. An impact turn the attempt at a perm. 3 is a footnoting dissent. You can't add blackness and centering. Blackness is a point of departure from the 1AC. That's Hawthorne in Heights in 18. It is impossible to engage with politics without questioning of power and access. The university has been a site wherein self-education has been legitimated. Academy can itself be a site of violence, but black geography is more. This is a project that black people assert claims to dialogue or invoke to obscure a lack of engagement and centering black can tell us what it thinks about space, place, power, and resistance. What if we instead take liberatory knowledge as the important departure rather than democratic dialogue, the materiality of intellectual inquiry against from black humanists, and for perm double by makes no sense. Competition is a question of net benefits, not solvency. Permutation to the plan and the alternative. Alternative, the sequencing question or epistemology comes first because it influences policy. They say that the alternative must have have a text. It does. It does. That was in the one in Seashell. The alternative is to vote negative to commit treason against whiteness, extend sovereign evidence. The alt decenters and depathologizes the one who sees whiteness through a centering of blackness. You should read our evidence. It gives explicit instruction to profoundly relocate debate's ethical center of gravity away from Eurocentric understandings of nation states and traditional IR towards blackness, the starting point as a corrective to Eurocentric international relations. Blackness is historically overdetermined through its location as the underside of humanity, which imbues us with the ability to rethink white notions of sovereignty, anarchy, and the nation state. It explicitly solves both the non-war link and the white being consently through restructuring what constitutes an ethical orientation towards alliances. Even if they win, it's important to analyze top-down IR from the perspective of great powers. You should bracket the plan in favor of our centering of blackness in order to decenter racism embedded within IR as a research program, which is a prerequisite to ethical political solutions within institutions. Voting AF will never make the passage of the plan more likely, but voting NEC can and will encourage debaters to rethink their approach to IR research that doesn't capitulate to white academic norms proven by their fiat evidence read in the 2AC. They said that their best for resistance strategies, however, not all activists are the same. The one is like him evidence says that we need to empower passive activists for the sake of counterinsurgency. Texas reads Yale. That's like him in 17 lessons. Can we learn from peace building from policy literature on counterinsurgency, either insurgency or counterinsurgency. Violence can succeed without passive support of civilian population that are constructed around deploying mobilizing people and resources, and justifies violent counterterrorist operations like intervention in Colombia under the guise of the war on terror. That's the N17. U.S. counterinsurgency in Colombia were meant to insulate the Colombians from reforming collated war on drugs for maintaining a pro-U.S. pro-US government would ensure stability. It fills the void left by Cold War in terms of military spending in Colombia, the preservation of capitals relations, and unhindered access to markets remains important. Access to South American oil and Panama cannot remain key consideration. The war on drugs in Colombia has altered U.S. military spending, sustaining a military industrial complex beyond the Cold War, and recasting these groups as narco guerrillas. Development of legal frameworks to legitimize action in the name of drug control, maintaining U.S. capital interests. They said they're not real estate, or I'll do that on case. They said that the Paris evidence, we've read evidence to prove the link between the two case. Extending Ambrosio evidence takes out the internal link to escalation because it proves that the threat construction of Russia is based upon Cold War securitization tropes that are not based on historical evidence, but rather a construction of how U.S. behaves. Ambrosio evidence is historical analysis of different ways in which the U.S. deployed described Russia's threat in specific instances, even citing Russian internal. I already have extended the alternative. Even citing Russian internal documents to be able to back up their arguments, but those relied on a securitized construction. The Fisher evidence proves the link from the 180 because the U.S. underestimates Russia's desire to not lose Ukraine, which is a scripting of Russia's desire onto Russia, which means that they can't weigh extinction against the gate even if we lose framework. We're also outcounting them 3-1 on this question. We have evidence that demonstrates that the U.S. has empirically used Russian threat construction in order to justify aggressive action towards Russia and turns the ability of the affirmative to solve peace building with Russia. The GRI evidence there's a deflection to set arguments that Russia world order is worse deflect from the world of U.S. hegemony and maintaining West primacy on a global scale prevents analysis of U.S. hegemony as a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's more built in 19 IR experts, redeliberalism, U.S. foreign policy, and exceptions that is not at all representative of America because realist protects security, delivering retroactively into economic destabilization, assassination, secret bombings, tragedies, where the alternative Russia hegemony is threatening to contemplate deflection of the U.S. world, maintaining the profoundly hierarchical racist reality of the current global order. It also makes it possible to address how U.S. foreign policy creating circumstances that give rise to failed states, war regimes, and terrorism. Mark credit terrorism.
Sorry, Ben, what do we have? Like 9:15?
9:05.
9:05. Okay, sorry now.
First card in the 1NR is not in the dock. The Future Generations link.
Let me send that out right now. Is it okay if it's in the body? get sent out. My bad.
Okay, I'm gonna restart prep once we get it. We're at 6:10 currently. Josh, do you have it? Okay, just restarting prep.
Okay, stop prep. 3:30.
I have 4 because I stopped prep. You didn't stop prep when we.
Oh, I
were
didn't
waiting.
stop prep. So, what, 4, Ben?
402.
Ben's sending a card for this one. Okay, the order is case and then. Are we all good? Yes. Cool. Case outweighs in terms of exchange versus PKO solves a number of impacts such as resource disparities, refugees, crisis, terrorism, climate change, and the national that terms of facing absent those PC not whiteness will insert domination onto other nations. That's a Linux card. The secondly, structural violence independently PKOs result genocide facility dialogue between minority populations, Middle East, Eastern Europe, and North Africa, and Southeast Asia. That's the Walters and Coleman card. Third, the blockage of the peacekeeping is now it's a question of effect. Is the U.S. NATO alliance hinders peacekeeping option to boss with Russia, and the UN probably they lead to continuation liberal alternatives players like churches, police, and then Assad casting curse. They have only red links to the Russia scenario, which we're not going for. All the peacekeeping operation stuff are independent of that, but they dropped the price card. This is the particularities can make to contextualize all their links as those alternatives, obviously, to how they resolve the impacts of the way see otherwise it leads to both the dogmatism as well as genocide, the interventions of war, the line by line proper. There's no Cold War propaganda stuff, all that. And it's not been contextualized to the peacekeeping operations, but also we resolve that because we cite how the U.S. has imposed the colonial domination through its imposition in the NATO alliance, but the plan would get rid of that alliance. That also solves the impact of the deflections that by recentering IR on the questions of blackness and how peacekeeping operations can lead to internal peace. It's just a question I tried out for the app, not worse. Okay, critique. Framework only evaluate plan desirability. They've conceded that requires link uniqueness and defending material alternative strategies. So first is clash of debates, not targeted research over the plan and cultivate nuanced argumentation, rigor that teaches superiors to avoid dogmatism and product generic arguments. They concede this turns all solves because their opponents are better trained and then able to adopt black spiritual or black IR culture in the best way possible. Secondly, fairness arguments. Most resolution and have resolution basis because they only give offense from the plan text itself. Their model to short limits. It's impossible to have a prepared defense against every word concept. And the possible embedding assumption the way he independently creates a disparate research protein and then man makes a negative victory impossible. They say the object of study means literally nothing. If the object of study concludes that the app is a bad idea, then you vote for it. Otherwise it creates a bad model. But within the object of study frame, you must still defend that you answer the Rodriguez card is answered by the Paris card as well as the Jarvis card, which are right now epistemology secondary to the plans on the harm reduction, the all causes, and then list debates on the cost of material, the effects of the Jarvis, and then epistemology basis facts and the allegiance and the installation, the contemplation, the struggle to the what does, and efforts to the press, how does it do the result of the war, how does, and then speak to those who comprise the policy, no, and then support the problem solving theories about the position, the applications of the solving, then the reality to the millions confrontation, and then the sense of the source of the epistemology, and be helpful. Also, they've dropped the theory, and then some material impact to it, which is a good means it's a good starting point. The first link they make here, the first link they make here, this IR link. I'll do the peacekeeping stuff here. Peacekeeping is good. The block did not do enough work here first, and the reduces conflict. Studies show that over 40 years of sub-Saharan African conflicts, and then taking into account which the presence of POs decreased civilian deaths and costs. This substantially the fewer killings that they serve to the physical barriers of mobilization, and this applied to stopping over 70% of conflict and mobilizing. And then we try second, it creates more peace. The presence and the PKOs makes all of the peace deals less longer, and then better deals with both sides. It encourages long-term solutions to the stops of the future wars. And the 4 evidence, Walter cites of the various studies, all the robust unique claims, and the research designed to the larger framework, but also interests of critique of peacemaking as well, because the Luckman and Lee cards, they read at the bottom of the flow as well as the Luckman and Lee cards. They read the bottom of our qualitative studies and ignore the successes and overemphasize the fear of their case studies. And then cherry pick and only identify problems that also it's inevitable. That was already done on case 1 2. We're here. One issue restriction only seats inside PKOs and intervention missions failures and alternative critiques and can order in light of the broader success. Audi an alternative required to convince the UN to stop missions altogether. Which they only consider to fill in actor. That's the Coleman Williams 7. Secondly, there's no alternative. 75 years in Pearson, the support that the critiques doesn't consider peacemaking on variations of any alternatives to authoritarianism in the global south. And the third reinforcement exists in them, the power structure that allows corrupt leaders to unchecked access to exploit. In this instance, the culturing, that results in the impact to their conflict and of what qualifies peace, because we all create peace as a localized level, and this where it's different and more particularized for different scenarios. There's still one broader interpretation of peace, as we understand there's certain failures, but it can be peacekeeping can be a useful tool if it's done better. The next link, the argument they go for is the team wants to follow stuff. I'll do the defense IR here. They have mischaracterized from our IR and through peace here. The Paris argument, the Paris card, debunks all this stuff as well. First, it's just the peacekeeping is not an invasion. There's a sequencing question of the U.S. invasion, Iraq, and peacekeeping. All their links are predicting the invasion coming first. It's not the vast majority of PKOs are requested. And the buy local, but second, peacekeeping is not colonialism, imperialism by definition must benefit the home country. The welfare structure doesn't apply to peacekeeping. And the flips to the distribution of resources by investing in local communities. But they're analyzing the AF and source communities. The alt seeks the Grow card itself is not offense. They've argued U.S. colonialism through imposition. We have argued that U.S. colonialism through imposition of NATO alliances and creates the condition for those wars to occur in the first place. The AF withdrawals and then allows cooperation. The Grow card does not disagree to the end point of our strategy. And so you should reject it. Now the next is the behavior link and the knowing Russia thing answered by the vice's evidence, which says that there are particular instances of IR being true. And also the show me card that still applies here says that Rodriguez on links that they go for. Now it creates more authoritarian regimes because they not and they create the nuance of different conflicts and under the whiteness. They cannot occur or control all instances. The extinction stuff not really matter. Doesn't really matter. because our impact is not necessarily extinction, but death is still bad. One is not agency. And the Fisher system causes famine, the black smog. And the impacts, and the third, there's a disparate impact, and the nuclear targeting urban cities and the black communities. And the constitutional is good. One is key for solutions. They should be responsible for the explaining alternative solutions. And otherwise, it leads to the imperfect solutions. It leads to the population. And there's no critique of whiteness because we think death is bad in every instance. And then the app would resolve instances of death and colonialism in the U.S. and then post it onto the imposition of NATO alliances. Also resolves this stuff for the alternative. And they go for it because the alternative cannot explain the actual successes of peacekeeping in the past. And as well as the alternative cannot rise to the level overthrowing the entire government or disrupting this one in the debate space because IR will continue. And the post alternative, there's only a risk that peacekeeping to begin this particular round. And then we can use IR to challenge the negativities that we think are good.
520.
the order will be the critique. Just for like flowing purposes, it will start at the peacekeeping, like good link debate, and then do. I think. Cool. Did you get the order? It will start in 10 seconds. No 1 second. The one error did a great job of repeating our arguments and saying not us, but hardly has answered any of them. Huge risk of a link that has a massive white reconstructed set turns the case dropped means you can vote negative regardless of the framework debate. Modern politics is structured by these special white beings through the project of colonial land theft, genocide, and enslavement. The international system is inseparable from its origins. The reshuffling of NATO alliances for the peacekeeping is part and parcel of flexible reform and logical white reconstruction. That's Rodriguez. Over white supremacy simultaneously more and less efficient, rising fascism across the planet, ecological devastation, indigenous lands, precedes the disparate killing of black and brown folks through genocide occupations. Their understanding of IRs structured by white supremacy extend the Gordon piece evidence here. The very theory of peace building is built on the Europeans' conceptions of nation state sovereignty that white out colonial violence. You should ask yourself, what is a world of peace if the last 70 years have been marked by endless wars, which they have dropped 10 plus examples from in the 2 and C. They have very understanding of peace, naturalized the settlement, slavery, and genocide in the status of the status quo because they don't arise to level war and conflict that disturbs peace in the status quo. To map and secure, to prescribe the world of Russian Ukraine interest is the fundamental based on the premise of anarchy, which presumes there's no hierarchy governing order that drives whiteness to maintain stability or peacekeeping in the face of perceived anarchic pragmatism that constitutes black and brown subjects. They have dropped the impact of cascading violence in the colonial periphery. The understanding of the last world as anarchy without a global order constitutes stripping humanity for black and brown subjects in order to say, look, we must impose peace upon you. The last 70 years of endless war, all too 10 to its examples dropped again. Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq 2.0 all prove the Western Allies' attempt to map and script out the world results in massive amounts of shadow warfare and colonialism. The only argument they have here is that peacekeeping is good for the 3 reasons, but they've dropped our answer to it. You should bracket every 2-hour plea to say peacekeeping good is a descent to the alt because they've dropped their scholarship. It's rooted in the politics of frame democracy that prescripts threats to U.S. in advance. The 1AC evidence says that China is a threat to U.S. security, Iran is an illiberal actor, etc. They've dropped all the quotes to prove that peacekeeping does not produce a neutral democracy, but one that is premised in an imperial vision of peace and security, which is where our Badamo evidence describes as the Western will to truth. Every study, think tank piece of intellectual scholarship that undergirds their 70% studies or case studies is what we have critiqued because they're based on their assumptions of military intervention, quote, impartial, which means the link outweighs the link turn. You should instead vote negative to commit treason against whiteness, extend the Sabermatian evidence, decenters and demythologizes when I see whiteness, descending of blackness. The evidence gives explicit judge instruction to relocate debates ethical center away from your restricting understandings of nation states. You voting negative is sufficient because our reframing of our dissent to preclude great power politics instead shifts the fame through which analysis happens. You should bracket the plan in favor of setting of blackness or decenter racism embedded in IR. That turns the case. Drop does not say the word in the 1 AR, and they do not get new 2 AR answers. It is not about the content of the app, but the form, the way that they're mobilized, and the content that the app creates might resolve an isolated instance of deterrence failure or imperialism via Article 5, but the form of military futurism secures the world from anarchism and ensures peace. It shifts tax containment to function through bilateral alliances or non-defense pact commitments they've dropped, such as probing vessels, which crosses the red line in 1AC evidence. They might now be going for the Russian scenario, but they've conceded the link turns the case, which means they don't have an extinction impact, but we do. It culminates in harder to detect the encirclement, which scares adversary more, makes miscalculation inevitable, as well as intervention and imperialism. The framework debate proper, it's a crush. They've dropped most of the 2 and C line by line analysis and the text of the counter-interpretation, which I'll explain here. Extended counter-interpretation is the 1AC object of study, but they dropped the second part that it must disprove scholarship produced by the object intrinsic to advantages, the plan, or solvency, which means it is predictable. App choice, salts, or offense are links to the plan and justifications with their chose, not just any word in the 1AC. They dropped it's not a question of justifications, but not a question of representations, but justifications which are distinct. It is not just any word. Winning a link argument. They've also dropped winning a link argument justifies procedural violation in the face of scholarship rooted in the colonial matrix, which means you don't even have to evaluate any of this debate because they've said that link you lose and have not answered in the 1 AR. The clash arguments proper dropped 2 arguments. One is that our interpretation solves it because we quoted your evidence and impact on your defenses. And second is the turn. Critiques under plan focused debates are worse. They cause a rush to utopian alternatives via a global power structure, solve extinction by causing a rush to the biggest terminal impact possible. The argument that it turns alt solvency is not dropped, but answered by the white reconstruction. It said you can answer it, you can extend it here. The model renders debate to decentralized network assistance, reducing debate to the parameters of whether consequence of line structure good or bad is mobilization of debaters within the structure of governance that focus on one particularity, reduces the scope of the empire to one of contingencies that reformulate its paradigm rather than one of the entire paradigm itself. Instead, you should correct and create an orientation of debate, an interpretation of debate that prioritizes the entirety of the empire rather than contingencies, which means if anything, they dilute the scale and scope of alternative solvency that makes it impossible to solve. Fairness, one, is not unfair. We've answered that above because predictability and clash is the biggest internal link. It's also not a terminal impact to the game broadly. If we win that you justify a game that is rooted in the colonial matrix, you should vote negative, as well as the arguments above that you should just throw out the 1AC if it's rooted in the colonial matrix writ large. Our impact turns outweigh because they've conceded impact framing arguments. Debate does not have a one-to-one correlation with the plan, but the way we speak and research does affect how we relate to otherness, which means epistemological questions are the only ones that your ballot can solve. The last hope they have here is the epistemology argument, but it's just asinine. One, a critique of epistemology relies on epistemology. It is an epistemological understanding of the way that epistemology influences yourself. It's its ontology and proves that epistemology is important to the reliance of the 1AC. Second is that backwards. All their 2AC evidence proves that the understanding of the world, peacekeeping, the UN, understanding IR, as well as nation states is important to understanding our politics. You should think of how do we formulate our politics? How do we weave the debate space? And if all of this is not persuasive to you, you can still vote on the fact that there's no one-to-one correlation between the two, and epistemology is the only thing your ballot can solve. Fiat good was 2 words, and the 1AC does not substantiate a warrant, but our argument is that if fiat narrows down the scale of abstraction, you should reject it. The argument about PKOs being inevitable, you should reject ethical blackmail, assumes the status quo in which whiteness centers the status quo. Our argument is the 1R decenters the foundation that requires peacekeeping missions to be, quote, the white man's burden, which is the one in our argument that they've dropped, i.e. that IR is a social system that can be disrupted from the bottom up. Anyways, it's a question of this debate. No alternative in the global south is irrelevant because they've conceded the distancing they said, that is, i.e. you should not weigh the consequences of the things out there because it's the process of deferral whereby colonial subjects can deflect interrogating their own assumptions. Rather, you should weigh the colonial scholarships in here. The next argument about nuances and textures, yes, we say that there are nuances, but we should understand them at the level of the paradigm itself. Extinction stuff does not matter because we're not going for Russia. They are not going for Russia. They've said it, but we have a turns case extinction impact, which answers all their arguments about.
.402. That was prep. Order is going to be case, the K. Could I get a verbal or visual when everyone's good? Okay. Boogroff, you good? Cool. Queso is the entirety of the K. The tuner was really liberal with the use of the word dropped, but the only thing that they actually dropped is the case page. I'm going for the peacekeeping impact because they have actually not made a material impact defense argument to a reinvigorated peacekeeping effort solves existential risk. The wind evidence from the 1AC articulates that resource disputes, autocratic backsliding, refugee flows, terrorism, climate change, nationalism, etc. are all uniquely increasing the status quo. All of these conflicts cross borders and risk nuclear escalation due to a great power drawn and have independent impacts that cause more structural violence. But the process of mitigating those risks start with small-scale conflict and instability that PKOs can resolve. That creates a basis for durable peace. I'll do this specific impact here, impact calc here versus their turns case extinction argument. None of the turns case stuff actually assumes peacekeeping. It's all about interventions, which is a single example that Het thinks gets them anywhere in the 2NR and in the bloc Iraq. Examples like Iraq or Vietnam are all U.S. wars that were started and invaded into those countries, not peacekeeping operations that not peacekeeping operations that escalated via that way. That is the thesis of the Paris evidence that they have not answered. I'll do all that on the Kane proper, which we'll get to now. But if we get to weigh the app and if there's any risk of it, you should be able to easily default affirmative on the impact that ways. I'll do the peacekeeping. I'll go to the K now and do the peacekeeping good debate. The 2NR drop the ball. I'll do the framing at the top. Winning these arguments zeros alt solvency because it means that their strategy of centering blackness fails to create any material change, which means the app creates net best change for the actual people that the K claims to solve for by actually reducing the sort of interstate conflicts that the impact is first is that it reduces conflict. The Walter evidence says that studies took over 40 years of African conflicts into account. It found that the presence of peacekeeping operations created a large decrease in civilian deaths as well as combatant deaths and causes substantially fewer mass killing by both the government and rebels. They serve as physical barriers to mobilization, which makes rebels unable to access supply chains, which contains over 70% of conflicts from mobilizing and moving into new regions. Second, it creates more peace. The presence of peacekeeping operations in negotiations made almost all peace deals last longer with better deals on both sides in over 50 years of conflict. This isn't that there's endless war, that there's not peace globally, but rather that peace exists in localized context for localized individuals, which is what the K impact claims to solve. In all of our impact calculus in the on the case page, it applies to presence encourages long-term solutions which stop future conflicts by 85%. The Walter evidence is quantifiably better than every piece of negative evidence that they have read. I implore you to read it. It reviews countless studies with diverse methods and large data sets over decades of time. Even if they win some quantitative studies are bad, consensus is clear that peacekeeping works when it is neutral. The only argument that they can win on is that starting from neutral spaces is key and that the AF doesn't do that. Walter resolves all of those distinctions when you filter it through the conceded price evidence on the case page extended in the 1AR and in the 2AC. Walter takes into account nearly every quantitative and qualitative study on peacekeeping and peacekeeping operations, which includes the authors that they are citing. They include that quantitative studies should be prepared, which it should explain why their authors find critiques of peacekeeping in the first place, because it distinguishes between quantitative and qualitative studies. The negative evidence is based in qualitative studies that ignore successes and only overemphasize failures. Successful operations are boring and don't get media coverage, which means that there's case studies by definition cherry pick and only identify problems instead of broader trends. This is the thesis of our particularity argument. The price evidence argues that prioritizing contingent small t truth claims through rigorous testing generates better scholarly conversations that creates more nuanced debates, which accesses to all of the impacts of the critique. I'll do this specific here. There's no indigenous land empire link. They've conceded that the alternative cements authoritarianism in the global south through reinforcing existing power structures that allow corrupt leaders unfettered access to create worse conditions for their citizens. That was on the inevitability debate they so happily ignored. Even if we don't win that PKOs are good, it doesn't matter because they're inevitable, which they have conceded. It's not first jurisdiction. The micropolitics of the alt can't stop PKOs. Individual mission failure and subaltern critiques get ignored by actors in light of broader successes. Even if they are correct that peacekeeping fails, any alternative requires convincing the UN to stop missions, which makes all of the violence inevitable in the world of the negative, which requires a fill-in actor in order to solve it. That's the Coleman and Williams evidence. That means that the AF has a particular strategy to engage peacekeeping, which makes it try or die for the affirmative because nothing the alt does solves the impacts of PKOs in the short term. The second, there's no alternative. Peacekeeping varies and is implemented across the board, which means that even if they win that one form is bad, 75 years of imperial support, that the UN just changes tactics and tries again. But any real alternative cements authoritarianism in the global south because it allows scrub leaders to do things like genocide their own citizens. That's the Kirchling evidence. Even if it is blackmail, they've conceded that it makes all their impacts inevitable, which means that try or die for the affirmative because the alt can't solve peacekeeping. Only the AF has a chance to make those structures better, which means that all of the links only are resolved by the affirmative in a material sense because we only have a material way to address ineffective peacekeeping. Independently, the Paris evidence resolves all their links. It characterizes that peacekeeping is not invasion, which answers all of the examples that they've gone for because there is a sequencing question between the U.S. invasion of Iraq and peacekeeping. All their links are predicated on invasion first and then peacekeeping, which denies that the vast majority of PKOs are requested by local governments. It's also not colonialism or imperialism because they don't benefit the home country. There's no wealth extraction motivation, and because it doesn't apply to keep peacekeeping, it actually flips the distribution, which impact turns the entire app because it invests in local communities. What they're analogizing is worse. The Fatimo stuff. It's about realism, and it's largely answered by the above arguments, which means that if we win the framework debate, then you should give us full weight. I'll do the framework debate here. Only about the desirability of the plan means your decision should answer the question of plan implementation, and the alt must materially solve to generate offense. Absent the alt being materially exported beyond debate to end the instances of whiteness, Texas neither has uniqueness nor a solvency for any link argument guaranteeing they have not met their burden for negative win condition. There's only going to go for the clash impact. They've dropped arguments must be resolutionary based because the resolution is the only predictable and stable point of contestation, independently enabling detailed and targeted research over the course of the season. They've also conceded that we win under their own framework interpretation because it's a question of the one season object of study, which we have then thus justified in the 2ER, which means that even if the solvency of it matters, then we still win under their interpretation because because peacekeeping is better and the AF is the only material way to solve it, which means that our epistemology doesn't matter.
Good debate.
Good debate, y'all.
Great, y'all. Do y'all need a card doc? No, cool.
Okay, I was the last one, and the decision is in if everybody's around. Zach is head here.
I just texted him. He's on his way.
I think we're missing Shay now. Shay, are you around?
Tried the summon option. I don't know if that's a real thing.
Yeah, good point. Notices have been sent.
I don't have his number, so
Yeah, I don't either.
oh shit, the summon thing is dope.
Oh, cool. He's here. Okay. I guess I can kind of begin and give announce the decision. I thought this was a really excellent debate. Congratulations to both of you on making it to the double octave finals of the People's Tournament, also the last tournament of the year. Blessed for both of those things. The decision is a 3-0 for the negative from Texas. And I can kind of just jump into it. I voted neg on the combination of winning the framework debate and the K turning the AF. I think treason to whiteness provides a better mechanism for engaging debates about alliances because it prioritizes a means of checking violence in scholarship. And I think that this debate really boils down to 3 issues. A, I think that 2AR gets to framework too late in the speech to build some of the cross applications you need and deal with the neg's offense. I end up deciding that I should consider the AF as a research artifact, which is critical to check forms of racism. And I think that the AF is right to lean on clash arguments, but I think it needs more nuance to deal with the next distinction, that it's not about any word, but representations of geopolitics and systems of international relations. And I don't think the AF has a good enough argument for why weighing the implementation of the plan is good for clash. I think that the res as a starting point is kind of generic, compared to maybe a better application of Walter's argument that scholarly evaluations of policy scenarios are essential to correct peacekeeping's flaws. I think leaning more on the educational affordances of fiat would give you a better way to weigh the AF, even if it's only about scholarship. And even if argument I think you have to win, but isn't as good in the 2AR, like what this performance of the AF does that's so good to check kind of misleading characterizations of peacekeeping. And so then B, I think it's fine that the AF didn't go for the Russia scenario, but I do think it's hard when your advantage boils down to impact claims that don't really have much explanation for things like time frame or magnitude. Like in the abstract, I can understand why terrorism, climate change, and unclear borders creating a risk of escalation is bad, but without clear development or much cards on any one of these, I think it's hard to buy the try or die argument if I think the link implicates how the AF solves. Yet I do think that the neg is also making some pretty okay arguments about why kind of this abstractness about nation states is kind of their point, right? That is where colonialism seeps in and we misunderstand or misidentify forms of conflict. And so then I think that C, the AF becomes too generically like peacekeeping is good, which I think is a problem given it deflates some of your particularities push and creates problems with the like way the neg wins their link argument. I think the Feinstein evidence is fine at proving why Article 5 creates an internal link, but its theorizing of national and regional interests kind of gives neg's link argument a lot of leverage, right? Like Rodriguez, Murray, Harper, Shipman, and Gordon are all implicating this understanding of the nation state. And I think that 2NR's characterization of Luna, re-descriptions of Iran and China, and I'd probably add North Korea after reading the card, demonstrates how the investments and bad understandings of international relations creates bad peacekeeping operations. So I guess TLDR, I think the AF can win this debate on A, being more specific about what the existential threat peacekeeping checks in the 2AR, B, having a better reason on framework to weigh the plan, and C, slightly different 1AR choices. I think a permutation is really valuable in this debate. I was kind of surprised that that wasn't a bigger part of the AF strategy. And I guess I have a couple of things to say at the neg, but I'll kind of wait to add those at the end if Max and Shay didn't get to them.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that in the entire description. I really don't have a ton more to add. I think that there's like a lack of development or pushback against the criticism of the social construction or the social system being constructed in terms of IR. I thought the Walter, like after reading through all of the Walter pieces of evidence, I was kind of more surprised that like it's better than I thought it would be. But I think that just like some of the habits of argumentation, instead of just saying, oh, they got a bunch of these like different research that they did. It's quantitative and it's qualitative. And there's all this really good research. Maybe being more specific in your depiction of the piece of evidence and highlighting some of the significant portions of it might have been a little bit more helpful. I think that the choices of the 1AR and the 2AR, as was being described, like the lack of development in terms of peacekeeping and kind of just like the broad strokes that you're taking, I think aren't as good as the 2NR depictions and the 2NR choices that are being made.
Yeah, I mean, my decision is largely in agreement with both Tyler and Max. I think one important thing that sort of strategically shapes my decision is that every kind of important section of the debate that the AF goes to, whether it's the peacekeeping good-bad debate, whether it's the framework debate, or questions of alternative solvency, there's always like a top-level framing argument that Texas has made that is able to largely filter out your explanation for these things. So, I'll start with what I think is probably the most important one, which is like the peacekeeping good-bad debate. The 1AR has to spend like a minute talking about this Waltz card at least. I mean, it's like a big part. You're doing a lot of examples. There's like 40 years of data from African conflicts and and it's not an invention in this stuff, but you never ever answered the way that the negative started the debate, which was that your Walter evidence says, quote, military intervention may be able to reduce mass killings if the mission is impartial. And they've said this is the framing mechanism for how the judges should evaluate peacekeeping being good or bad. If the negative is able to win a link that indicates that the sort of intentionality in assumptions or the partiality of the affirmative is one that is racist, unethical, civilizationist, etc., then it proves that even if Walt is fundamentally correct, the AF's presentation of that discussion in this debate is an unethical one. It misframes the question of peacekeeping in such a narrow context that it excludes other modes of context and certainly crowds out the possibility of recognizing this idea of the US going around fucking up people for non-peacekeeping reasons and then being like, oh, don't worry, now we're going to let you ask us to help you. So like every time that you make this argument that peacekeeping is reliant upon countries asking for help or that it's not colonial because there's no like occupational force or return of wealth, these are kind of missing the fundamental question of what the purpose of the negatives criticism is. And so although they're kind of like smart and like kind of important arguments, they only really have a cutting bite if you deal with that top level framing question. And I'm not sure you overcome that threshold at any point in the debate. As a result, it's more or less easy for the negative to win that the way that you construct the world is one in terms of white reconstructionism, which is definitely racist. On the framework debate, I kind of agree that you're behind on some questions of the sort of epistemic value of weighing the plan, but you've also made some misleading, or not misleading, but some unwise concessions on stuff like the link you lose argument in the context of this colonial matrix stuff. You know, I think going back to the question of why fiat or the implementation of the plan has epistemic value would largely resolve this question, or at least compete with that question. Because I mean, I think all three of the judges, maybe I'm speaking a little too much, aren't just always gonna like draw a line in the sand and be like, haha, link, game over, right? Like there's a debate to be had. And as soon as you draw the assumptions about why is it epistemically good to learn about peacekeeping at all? Like you've taught me a lot about it, but I don't know that there's any intrinsic benefit in the context of debate to learning about peacekeeping. If you can come up with those justifications, which is kind of what Het is just talking about when it comes to evaluating the epistemology F, what are the justifications of the 1AC? What is the research praxis of the 1AC? And why do those things have intrinsic benefit to them outside of a sort of consequentialist framework for whether or not peacekeeping stopped conflict or prevented the reoccurrence of conflict, extended peace or whatever? So I think if you were able to sort of deal with some of those smaller framing questions, it would make a lot of the 2AR a lot more strategic. But as it stands, you sort of miss the boat just a little bit on a couple key questions, and it ends up putting you pretty far behind for me.
Thank you all so much for judging. A lot of what you all have said aligns with kind of the reflection I did after the debate. And so it's good to know that I was kind of thinking the same way you all were. But the one question I have is, obviously you've articulated that a lot of the questions like the you wink, you lose stuff kind of, and the Walters card itself starts in the 1AR. Do you think that there's any real, given the 1AR that was given, that the 2AR could have come back from those questions? I was trying to do a little bit of hedging versus the examples that they have, et cetera, on the links, which I know wasn't really happening specifically in the 1AR. Do you think that that was helpful, that there was more I could have done without kind of bridging the gap to being way too new and just kind of being rejected wholesale?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, in terms of this, like you link, you lose argument, you've already made some sort of analysis about the relative benefits of qualitative or quantitative studies. So even producing a benefit of that analysis as an intrinsic educational pedagogical activity generates some justification for why I would be able to evaluate the AF's sort of theory of the world or project of research against their link arguments, right? It would still require you to do some like comparison on that question, but I certainly think you, at different points, you have the groundwork for those arguments. And I, you know, maybe it's like a little-ish new in the 2AR. I couldn't see myself drawing like a real hard line on the flow and being like, no, you know, it's not like one-to-one here. Like, I think I would give you the leeway.
Same. I think for a lot of like those instances, at least for me, it's like I'm not really drawing those lines either. I think it's more big picture towards the end. You know, I don't think like just auto lose just because it's not in the exact same existence earlier in the debate. But I think the meta framing question for me, like Shay was talking about, is like it's in every negative speech, and like the framing question becomes super significant for me.
I also definitely don't think that this debate is done before like you give the 2AR. I mean, I think that for me, it's maybe kind of a matter of packaging and how you pull some of the things that the 1AR is doing that are good into kind of framing what I should do with some of the things that the NEC has won. And so I think that it's really kind of a question of like impact calculus of like dealing with some of the nitty gritty of this framework stuff, and then dealing with some of the nitty gritty of like, if they want to link, what does that actually mean? Your solvency, impact, and kind of just fleshing that out a little bit more, right? Recharacterize how they've kind of tried to describe the world, I think could like tilt the decision for me at least.
The one last question I have is specifically about Che's decision, though I'm sure the other judges might want to weigh in as well. This like line from the Walters card that they're talking about military interventions, I had found that line before when I was reading through it, just being like, oh, this is one of the places where it might get drawn out. Do you think that the answer I came up with that I didn't obviously say was that this is like talking about one of the studies out of many, and it doesn't really implicate, it's not a top level frame that Walter pushes on, but rather it's just an articulation of one of the studies that like
Absolutely.
Really
and
use.
I think this even kind of goes hand in hand with your argument that a lot of like defense to peacekeeping being good is like cherry picked examples of single failures that ignore the successes. You can be like, Het is guilty of cherry picking a partial sentence describing military intervention, not even specifically peacekeeping intervention, and then is using that to like totalizingly frame the question. Like call out Texas's bullshit. Like that link defense is pretty convincing to me, but it just like doesn't exist. And so that ends up giving a lot more weight when it shouldn't.
Yeah, no, totally understandable.
And I'll actually echo something Max said. Like, I'm not gonna lie, your cards on peacekeeping were like way better than I expected them to be, and like outside of this debate, definitely made me think about peacekeeping in a way that like I haven't before. And so like props to cutting evidence that like I do think is really cutting at how the neg is trying to characterize your business. And I think that this is kind of just illustrating needing a little bit more finesse as you're putting that into debate.
By comparison, I'm old enough to have debated on the high school peacekeeping topic in like, God, that was like 2004 or something, 2004 or 5, I think.
Mhm.
So, I mean, this just brought back all the memories. So I kind of like that.
I started looking at like the studies that they were using for the evidence just to see if I could find any problems with it, but I really couldn't. So good research.
Yeah, thank you all so much for judging, and good luck to Texas and against whoever wins the other side of that debate.
Good round. Good luck.
Good job,
Thank you so
everyone.
much
Yeah,
for
good
everyone
luck,
for
Texas.
judging. Good debate, Michigan.
Texas, 3 things.
Yeah.
One, I think you need to hold the scope of the AF in check more. It's weird that by the end of the debate, I feel like that I haven't, like I actually don't know very much about like what the plan does and why that is instrumental to peacekeeping. And I think you could deflate some more of this offense by just being like, even if that's true, you don't actually get to a world where we would have like global peacekeeping operations to keep every instance of like terrorism and climate change in check, right? Like that seems pretty wild. 2, I think you need to sell, like in the 2NR, you had this argument about shadow warfare and colonialism to unpack basically your case turn to your link. And I think you should sell that more. I thought that was like the most persuasive part of kind of like, even if they're right that peacekeeping is good, the US will undermine those peacekeeping operations through other tactics that taint them, right? I mean, there's been enough overthrows of governments via the CIA that I think that that's probably pretty true. And then the third thing that I'll say is like, I think you should be more abusive about what you flex your alt to be, in terms of like, I think that in this debate becomes like an epistemic corrective, right? Center blackness in order to reject how scholarship works. But like when I read the language about loyalty to humanity, like it really makes me wonder, like, what does that entail, right? Like, could you imagine a world where like what the 1NC would endorse as strategies would be a kind of linking up of oppressed peoples that would also do things like check climate change, check refugee flows and things like that? I'm not sure that you could just spin that in the 2NR in this debate without doing a little bit more block setup, but like, I'm not against cheating alts, like make bold decisions, and I think that they can pay off. Not that you didn't do that in this debate, but it was just like a couple of things that occurred to me that I wanted to throw out.
For sure. Definitely will keep that in mind going in the future. Again, thank you so much for your comments. Both of you, thank you so much for judging. We really appreciate it.
Yep. Good debate.
Good luck, y'all.
Good luck.